Welcome to Scott's Odyssey. Sometimes we as a people act in a specific way for something we believe is right. But sometimes what we think is right turns out to be very wrong. Which brings us to 1763 in Pennsylvania, and the story of a group of people who thought they were doing the right thing for the right reason, only to end up becoming monsters who, without them, we wouldn't be the United States we are today. See you in a minute. Welcome back. If you've watched my videos before, thank you for your patronage. And if you're new to Scott's Odyssey, welcome aboard. As we saw in our Pennsylvania 30 Facts video, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is a weird melting pot of history and an incredible example of the early frontier. Oddly enough, the month of December seems to be important for a lot of events to come to a head and be taken care of rather quickly and decisively. I mean, Washington crossed the Delaware on Christmas to lay waste to the Hessians in Trenton, and Pennsylvania stepped up to the second ratifier of the Constitution of the United States on December 12th, just 7 days after Delaware, and it was far from a unanimous vote. What? You thought everyone got together and said, yeah, this Constitution thing works. It actually took 10 months for 9 states to ratify the Constitution, which was the minimum number of states to have ratified the Constitution for it to become valid. And the agreement was that it would take place within a 6-month time period, which obviously got pushed out. Virginia and New York only ratified because it became legal right after New Hampshire finally ratified it as the 9th state. North Carolina and Rhode Island dragged their feet for more than a year before finally ratifying the Constitution after they realized there was no getting out of it, and they started to go bankrupt from nobody in the Union doing business with them for being the outliers. I believe the reason for making quick decisions in a timely period at the end of the year in Pennsylvania is because of how intolerably cold and snowy it gets here due to the lake effect of Erie across the entire state and the downdraft from Canadian dry cold air mixing with the updraft from the coastal humid tropical weather of the eastern seaboard, creating this swirl in the keystone that leads to heavy snowfall and very wet and cold winds. Another such winter was that of December 14th in 1763, down in what is now known as Conestoga. Yeah, the place where the Stogies come from. You see, it was 1763 and the pioneers in the area were still settling into their communities, and likewise the indigenous were adapting to their new neighbors in very cooperative and friendly manners. How do we know this? Well, because they not only lived next door to each other, but they traded between each other and protected each other from animal incursions into their coexisting lifestyles. Why was this a big deal? Well, it was 1763, the year that marked the end to the 7 Years' War, where the British colonists were fighting the French, both sides being equally endowed with different native tribes, whom they themselves were already at war with the other native tribes before the French or the British even started their own squabble over the colonies. Yes, the natives east of the Mississippi River, the Haudenosaunee, or more commonly and incorrectly, the Iroquois Nation, were at war with the Cherokee Nation, which is funny because some of the people who are trying to make a big societal deal out of the history that will be put forth to you today are self-proclaimed members of the Cherokee Nation, although they are not enrolled tribal members, nor citizens of any tribe or village, and more importantly, not the Pennsylvania natives of the Susquehannock or the actual Conestoga tribe. And if you speak with those whom we call the natives, you will know that what mattered was not so much what nation you were a member, but rather your tribe specifically. I identify this because the important part of this story is not who was on what side. Because in the end, we're all just human. And we're not white or black or red or yellow. And if I missed your skin color, then now you need to get over yourself. Because it's us as humans together that make the difference. Not your petty opinion of how you identify yourself or where you come from. back to the history. So the 7 Years' War ended with the Treaty of Paris on September 3rd, 1763. Then it took 2 months to reach the colonies and several weeks for the word to actually spread once it was received. That puts us sometime around late November to maybe even the first week of December for colonists to have heard that the 7 Years' War had actually ended. The end to a war that had been tearing apart the First Nations people and the European colonists of Britain and France, right here in the now long time shared America. We are talking over 163 years of cohabitation. It wasn't like this was even the first decade of colonization. We're talking more than 8 generations of colonists born and raised right here in North America. So the treaty comes through, which was great. It meant everyone could get back to just living and taking care of more important things like how the hell are we going to get through this winter with the limited stocks that we have from the previous summer, being that we were at war. But before those of us in Pennsylvania heard about the treaty, there was already another declaration of war that spat in the face of the treaty because they didn't want any of the British military who had previously won territory during the 7 Years' War to be in that territory. Insert Pontiac's Rebellion, where the leader of the Ottawa tribe, Pontiac, pulled together any outlying natives of the Algonquin, Muskegon, so on, essentially Iroquois-speaking Native Americans, who would listen to his rhetoric about dispatching all of the British and taking back all of their lands. Word of Pontiac's Rebellion hit the pages of news before the news of the Treaty of Paris for most people living in the barely settled areas of Pennsylvania, the places called the frontiers. Needless to say, that first week of December in 1763, when it came to news and information, was excessively conflicting. On the pioneer side, there had been a series of ambushes and a few homestead burnings being talked about down in the Lancaster area. So of course, tensions were still extremely high, and people, both the colonists and the local friendly natives, were all a bit touchy. And if you think about why this would be, well, maybe because your child, a sibling, a parent, someone close to you suffered at the hands of an offender whose skin may not have been the same color as yours, whose language may or may not have been different, whose ways may or may not have been different. I mean, the variables were enormous. It's not like it was white people versus Indians. You had British colonies full of British, which means you had Saxons, Welsh, Norse, Irish, Scots, not to mention the colonists who were Swedes, Dutch, German, and even French Huguenots whom were expatriates, or more so, excommunicates of France, all with their own ways, their own skin color, their own words, their own religions, their own foods, and their own culture. Remember, Pennsylvania was founded by a Quaker, William Penn, who believed in peace and harmony between all people, regardless of color, creed, or culture. And he was especially fond of the natives, and all the land grants, the deeds, the purchases done by Pennsylvania were done in the fairest manner possible, as well as often done to protect the sanctity of smaller native tribes in the areas that we were trying to colonize. So all this hate between Indians and colonists was more of an issue with someone different hurting you and yours that kept everyone on edge during a time of peace at the end of this war. But we're not here to speak about Pontiac's Rebellion. This was all just to let you know what was going on before that fateful night of December 14th in 1763. At this point in time, Lancaster was growing really well as a very developed frontier. There were those of Lancaster who were colonists. There was a native tribe who had their protected by the Commonwealth land rights right next to Lancaster called the Conestoga. And by this time, if you would have gone to Conestoga, it would have looked like any other colonial town in Pennsylvania, just with native influence and more Native Americans than people of European descent. And then there were those of Conestoga whom were converts of their own will to Christianity who lived both in Lancaster and in Conestoga. Just a bit away was where you would see the start of the hillier portions of Pennsylvania, like the former village of Paxton, a location formerly inhabited by Shawnee Lenape, who had sold off this area to William Penn and confirmed it by treaty in 1701. With the new name of the location being anglicized to Paxton, it became a common trade route and later an area where outlying pioneers would venture. During the French and Indian War, there was a lot of contesting in regards to ownership of this area, and being the basic native belief of how someone could own land was somewhat foreign, there were a good number of natives fighting with the local Scots-Irish throughout this entire area. So now we have a situation of people in Paxton having frequent issues with natives during the French and Indian War that had just ended. Top that off with Pontiac's rebellion kicking off and the natives in the area of Paxton being the exact people Pontiac was looking to recruit for his war. Then we add the third piece. Just the week before hearing about the Treaty of Paris, people had heard about Pontiac's rebellion. But just a week before hearing about Pontiac's rebellion, the people were already pissed off about the Royal Proclamation of 1763, deemed by King George III on October 7th, that only the king can determine North American territories surrendered by France, and that all territory from the Appalachians west were Aboriginal territories. Along with this was that it was formally recognized that the Aboriginal people are nations, and that they own the lands that they live and operate on. Well, for a bunch of people that had been fighting for their right to live and operate on land that had been purchased by them from William Penn, who had bought it from the natives, didn't sit quite well, to say the least. And this is where the story actually gets sad from a societal side. All this tension built up to a point where a Presbyterian leader stepped up with his take on all that was going on and likened it to that of the Israelites expulsing the Canaanites and, if necessary, exterminating them, their cult, and protecting their identity and liberty. This man was Reverend John Elder, often referred to as the Fighting Parson. Due to his preaching of such rhetoric during the French and Indian War, he ended up creating a sort of cultish parish when it came to the decrees coming to those who were the pioneers within this area. So I just want to be clear. I wasn't there, and neither were you. So before we judge these people, just realize that they already believed they were out of the hands of the king, living free and independent on a day-to-day life of frontier living, and had moved their religion to Pennsylvania in order to escape the religious wars of Europe that happened during the 80 Years' War and the 30 Years' War, starting in the 1500s and lasting into the 1600s. They essentially were the first true Americans when it came to freedom and liberty, with an attitude of around and find out. So a large number of the parish of Paxton found themselves believing that they were similar to the Israelites, and the Native Americans were similar to the Canaanites. The concept that any of these Indians could be friendly, Christian, or peaceful didn't even matter at this point. To them, religiously, it was an invalid argument because their heinous cult needed to be destroyed. The rumors that came out of Paxton were spreading quickly, and there were ones that began verbally targeting Tensi-da-Agua, or Will Sock, one of the more prominent members of the Conestoga, claiming that the citizens of Conestoga were funneling weapons and food to those who were fighting on behalf of Pontiac further west. And their proof came from Matthew Smith, who claimed he and his group of men saw dozens of strange armed Indians in the Conestoga village. Those of Paxton started cutting the natives off from food and trade, and it reached a point where the natives sought a peaceful resolution by petitioning the province, where they asked for protection and provisions from the governor, as is recorded in this letter found in the colonial records. To the Honorable John Penn, Esquire, Lieutenant Governor and Commander-in-Chief of the Province of Pennsylvania. Brother, we, the Conestoga Indians, take the present opportunity by Captain Montour to welcome you into this country by this string of wampum. And as we are settled at this place by an agreement of peace and amity, established between your grandfathers and ours, we now promise ourselves your favor and protection. And as we have always lived in peace and quietness with our brethren and neighbors round us during the last and present Indian wars, we hope now, as we are deprived from supporting our families by hunting, as we formerly did, you will consider our distressed situation and grant our women and children some clothing to cover them this winter. The government has always been kind enough to allow us provisions, and did formally appoint people to take care of us, but as there is no person to take that upon him, and some of our neighbors have encroached upon the tract of land reserved here for our use, we would now beg our brother, the governor, to appoint our friend Captain Thomas McKee, who lives near us and understands our language, to take care and see justice done. This letter was sent just a month before the end of the French and Indian War, the beginning of Pontiac's rebellion, and the Royal Proclamation. With all of this information in transition, things just got messy very quickly, and before Pennsylvania government could act, a heinous action took place. December 14th, 1763, during the light of early morning, a group of vigilante pioneers gathered themselves into a posse and went to Conestoga with the decree that they would be removing all remnants of the Indians. This group became known as the Paxton Boys. Now, this was not a colonist versus Indians attack. The Paxton Boys were doing more than killing off the Indians they hated. They were sending a clear message to the peaceful Quaker politicians of Pennsylvania that if PA was not going to fight off these Indians for the colonists, then they were going to take it into their own hands, regardless of any treaty. Numbers bounce back and forth, but the essence is that about 56 Paxton Boys went into Conestoga, and within the village they killed 6 women and children who were there and burned the village to the ground. The men of the village, whom were on their way back from trading and working, were warned and grabbed by the locals and taken to the Lancaster workhouse for their own protection and to hide them from the Paxton Boys. The Paxton Boys felt defeated that they only killed 6 and began their hunt specifically for Will Sock, now calling him a murderer as well as a spy for Pontiac. On December 27th, the Paxton Boys rode into Lancaster. It is stated that Reverend Elder tried to restrain the Paxton Boys to no avail. The Paxton Boys broke into the Lancaster workhouse to eliminate the last of the Conestoga. William Henry, a Lancaster local politician and gunsmith, 2 careers you probably never hear together in today's age, he recounts what he witnessed. I saw a number of people running down the street toward the jail, which enticed me and other lads to follow them. And about 60 or 80 yards from the jail, we met from 25 to 30 men, well mounted on horses and with rifles, tomahawks, and scalping knives, equipped for murder. I ran into the prison yard, and there, oh, what a horrid sight presented itself to my view. Near the back door of the prison lay an old Indian and his woman, particularly well known and esteemed by the people of the town on account of his placid and friendly conduct. His name was Will Sock. Across him and his native woman lay 2 children of about the age of 3 years, whose heads were split with tomahawks and their scalps all taken off. Towards the middle of the jail yard, along the west side of the wall, lay a stout Indian, whom I particularly noticed to have been shot in the breast. His legs were chopped off with tomahawk, his hands cut off, and finally a rifle ball discharged in his mouth so that his head was blown to atoms and the brains were splashed against and yet hanging to the wall for 3 or 4 feet all around. This man's hands and feet had also been chopped off with a tomahawk. In this manner lay the whole of them, men, women, children, spread about the prison yard, shot, scalped, hacked, and cut to pieces. After this attack, Governor John Penn issued proclamations ordering all local magistrates to arrest the men involved in the massacre and a substantial reward for the capture of the ringleaders. Benjamin Franklin wrote, "The universal concern of the neighboring white people on hearing of this event and the lamentations of the younger Indians when they returned and saw the desolation and the butchery, half-burned bodies of their murdered parents and other relatives cannot well be expressed." Unfortunately, the residents of the area were sympathetic to the actions of the Paxton boys, so none of the people who participated in the event were ever captured nor prosecuted. The actions of the Paxton boys and the response by the provincial leaders took a steep turn in January of 1764. Over 600 armed frontiersmen marched on Philadelphia due to their anger against the provincial assembly. The claims were that Pennsylvania was not protecting its citizens, both colonists and natives, with their Quaker style of passive posturing. No redress for the protests were received by any of the citizens after the complaints were heard by the legislature. This lack of addressing the concerns led to the Proprietary Party, or Gentleman's Party, winning the election in 1764. The main backing of their ticket was that the Proprietary Party opposed the King's Stamp Act, taxation, and believed in Penn's property rights, as well as military defense spending for the protection of the province against anyone who opposed the province, the people of the province, even if it was the king himself. And that's the story of the Paxton boys. Now, I don't agree with what they did in any manner. If you want my honest opinion, they all should have been tried and hanged for their actions. But because of what they did, it made other people think about the situations brewing with the provincial government, the colonies, and, well, interactions with the king. And if this event did not happen, then there would have never been a march on Philadelphia, which led to the election of the Proprietary Party, which ultimately set the foundation for why we revolted against the king just a decade later. Just think, if this incident never happened, would the revolution have taken place? I hope you like learning about the Paxton boys and what was rooted in the cause for their actions. If you learned something new, give the video a like. Hit the subscribe, share the video out to other people who might be interested. Those simple actions really help the channel, and it takes little effort on your side. And if you wouldn't mind going out and picking up some merch or making a donation on PayPal or Patreon to help support a creator. As always, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.